Hi everybody, we're back and we're going to talk now about the top 10 tips for a better client interview. My name is Rhonda Williams. I've been working in the immigration field since 1992, really long time. I used to work as a visa officer, and as a visa officer I did actually thousands of interviews with applicants in all kinds of different categories. So I've done a lot of interviews. As an immigration consultant since the 90s, I've also done a lot of interviews with clients and prospective clients, as Amir was talking about, prospective clients. It's some skills that you need to learn in our profession because it is something that we are doing all the time. We're talking to clients, especially prospective clients. So, sorry, my clicker's not working. There we go. So the first thing is don't multitask. Get yourself ready. Get your office ready. So it means that you have to have your office furniture prepared so that it's in a good state to receive clients that you're going to be speaking to. It shouldn't be, lifting papers off your chairs and saying, oh, sorry, excuse me, let me just move those things. You need to have those all ready so that the client comes in and feels that you're calm, that you're professional, that you know what you're doing, that you are ready for them. So you have to also make sure that you've removed any confidential material that might be around, not just on your desk, which definitely shouldn't be on your desk, but anywhere near that they could see. So that if you have confidential files around, make sure that they're put away out of sight so that people can't see them. Because again, it's an image of professionalism that you want to be promoting to your prospective clients, that when they sign up with you, their confidential material is also not going to be just lying around where anybody could see it. So it gives them a bit of confidence that you have filing cabinets or something, that there's nothing in sight. Any possible distractions for you or the client should be removed. So just make sure that there's nothing that could be distracting in your office to the clients or to you. So no television screens that you'd be, oh, I'm talking to you, but oh, that's a really fascinating commercial that's on TV, or oh, sorry, back to you. You want to make sure that they realize that you're focused on them. Your staff should be ready. They should know that you have a client coming, and they should be prepared to greet the client pleasantly and to bring the client into you, or to let you know that the client is there so that you can go out and greet the client. For yourself, you should review, if you're using Amir's Officio, you should review the material that you have on the file, like the prospective client questionnaire that you have. Otherwise, I have my own pre-application questionnaire that I ask clients to fill out. So I review that before I see the client to make sure I know what their issues are, what they're coming to see me about, briefly. They will no doubt reveal a lot more when they're there speaking to me, but at least I have some idea of what they're coming to see me about. Clear your calendar of any other events or tasks that you might have pending. Make sure that you're, again, focused in. Turn off your phone, or make sure that your staff is not forwarding phones to your telephone in your office during the interview. That, again, focus on the client. Greet the guest pleasantly, show them in, make sure they're comfortable, and then devote yourself to them. Make sure that they know that your focus is on them throughout the interview. Oh, there we go. So which do you think is the best seating arrangement out of all of these possible seating arrangements here? Is it where you're kind of shouting across the room to Mr. Batani, can you hear me over there? That's probably not a really good one. No. I've got people in the room shaking their heads. No, that's not a good one. How about where there's no desk? We tend to have a lot of paperwork in immigration, and clients are constantly coming in with armloads of papers. Would you like to see this? Would you like to see that? So it's better if there's some kind of tabletop or desktop that you would be able to put these papers on and maybe spread out so that they can show you what they brought to show you. How about this one? I bet that's what a lot of people have, though. How many people have an arrangement like this? Oh, nobody. Everybody's doing this one? Yeah. And that is because it's a more friendly arrangement. You can talk to somebody just over the corner of the desk, and it's much easier, much more friendly. You can share papers. You can both look at papers at the same time without, something being upside down. And there's actually a science about this. It's called Proxemics. And it shows that actually across the table seating, which many people have in offices, there's less recall of what you've said or what they've said. There's more rejection, a higher rate of rejection for your proposals to clients. And people tend to speak in shorter sentences, so there's maybe less exchange of information. If you have the chair on the corner of the table or using a round table, which is also another really good arrangement, you can look at the documents together and the client feels that you're on their side. You literally are on their side with them. So they feel much happier and they're more inclined to seal the deal with you if they have that kind of seating arrangement. Even an angle is better than a head-on arrangement. The client will also speak in longer sentences. They'll tend to speak in longer sentences, and this means a higher degree of information exchange between you and the client. They're letting you know more of the details of why they've come to see you, what their concerns are, what their issues are. And you'll have a better opportunity because it goes both ways. It's not just how they feel, but it's also how you feel. So you're more likely to understand what they're saying and to take on board the things that they're saying and remember the things. And there's likely to be a lower rejection rate of any proposals that you make to the client with regard to their issues and what to do about it. Don't pontificate. So in our immigration world, we have a lot of terminology that's exclusive to our world. And if you start to use that kind of terminology with somebody who's just come in off the street to do a spousal sponsorship or something like that, they're not going to understand. So you need to speak at a level that is very easy to understand without being condescending. Just make your language simpler and easier for them to understand. Don't use a lot of industry-specific terminology or acronyms. In our profession, we know there are so many acronyms. I mean, IRCC, ICCRC, CBSA, it just goes on and on and on. But again, the person coming in off the street, they don't understand those acronyms. So either you have to say them out or talk about something like the authorities that deal with immigration or something to that effect. If you're dealing, for example, with all of the authorities in Canada who deal with immigration matters. So try to simplify your language and don't use that language that is insider language, because it's not going to go over well with the client. They're going to feel baffled by the time they go out, which is not going to really help them get a warm, fuzzy feeling about you as their representative. If you don't know something, you don't have to try and pretend you know everything. This is, again, part of the pontification. You don't have to pretend you know everything. If you don't know something, say, I'm sorry, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer right now, but I will check into it and I'll get back to you by tomorrow or by next week or whatever it happens to be. So you'll get back to them in a certain period of time. So let them know that, they've come up with something unusual, hopefully, it's not something basic that you don't know the answer to, but you'll get back to them. Use open-ended questions. First of all, when they first come in, you don't use the open-ended questions. You start with closed questions. And closed questions are questions that people know the answer to immediately, and there's only one right answer. What's your date of birth? That's a closed question because there's only one answer. It's the correct answer. There are no other variations. People can only have been born on one possible date. So they start to feel comfortable because they know the answer to that question. You're not asking them something difficult or something that's too personal. So try and, how was your journey here today? Was it okay? Did you have trouble finding parking? Those kinds of questions. How do you spell your last name? Just to start putting people at ease and letting them know that, they can relax and start to feel comfortable. After that, you move on to the open-ended questions. And these are there used to be a television program called W5, which of course shows my age. Who, what, when, where, and why. And then the last question is how. So those are the open-ended questions. Why did you come to see me today? And that gives the applicant, the prospective client, the opportunity to explain their situation. What were you hoping that I would be able to do for you? So again, they get an opportunity to say, well, I was hoping you'd be able to help me with my spousal sponsorship. If there's any timelines or any other questions that you can ask along these lines, the open-ended questions are where you start to get to the meat of the matter. And don't forget, there's the scoop question. And the scoop question is something you may ask closer to the end of the interview. And that is there anything else you'd like to tell me or ask me today? And this often ends up being the most important question that you will ask. Because sometimes they come in and they go over things and, it might seem very straightforward, like a spousal sponsorship, for example. It might seem very straightforward. But then near the end, you say, is there anything else you'd like to tell me? And they go, the spouse that I want to sponsor has a DUI. Do you think that'll be important? And of course you think that's very important. Yes, I need to know about that. But they might have been very nervous to ask you about that because they know it's important. They know that it could really have an impact. But they were really nervous about asking you because it's so important. So give them that opportunity. Is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Is there anything else I should know? Anything else that you'd like to ask me while you're here? You've made the effort to come in to see me. We're both here. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me? So again, that might be the most important question of the whole interview. So don't ever forget that one. Go with the flow. So if the conversation is leading somewhere, as long as it's not, leading down some rabbit hole like their whole life story, but if it's really pertinent to what you're talking about, make sure that you just allow them to kind of take the lead and discuss what they want to discuss with you. You can say, if there's any questions, you can ask me questions, but just tell me your story. Tell me what you're hoping that you'd like to do. Use mirror paraphrasing. So if somebody says to you, yes, my husband was married before, but he's divorced now. So you can mirror paraphrase by saying, oh, so he was divorced before, but you're married to each other now. And then you might have a follow-up question like, was he divorced? Did the wife die? Some kind of follow-up. But if you use that mirror paraphrasing, they know that you've listened, you've heard, you've understood, and you've verified to them that you understood that the husband was married before, that the person was married before. So that's an important thing in a spousal sponsorship to know. But the mirror paraphrasing is a way to let them know that you're really taking on board what they're telling you. Also watch for nonverbal clues. So if suddenly they kind of, bunch up and they kind of go, oh, and they maybe turn away from you a little bit, that might be a clue that maybe this is getting really personal, or maybe there's something they're trying to hide or that they don't want to talk about. So try to, if you can, gently probe that and see where that leads. If they, keep closed and barriers are up, it might be something that you could go into more at a later time. But try to watch for those verbal clues to make sure that you're understanding if there's something going on that they're not verbalizing, but you can see in their body language.
What if they're just cold?
Right. No. Okay, the question was, what if they're just cold? Very possible. Very possible. When I was a visa officer, I had a man come in, and he was from a culture that doesn't like women very much, but I was a visa officer nonetheless. He did not look at me for the whole interview. He sat like this. I was over there. He sat like this. He looked over there. He wouldn't look at me. So that was a cultural difference that you also have to be aware of. In this case, he was also very hostile, but it can be cues like that that you can sometimes see and hopefully read properly. But you can inquire if it's too cold in the room.
I don't have access to that much.
Okay, I'll survive.
So you also want to funnel the questions a little bit to kind of, people come in and they tell you all sorts of things that they may think are important. For example, in a spousal case, they might think that it's really important what their income is, whereas we all know that that's not a big deal as long as they're not on any kind of social assistance. But they might be going into great detail on that. So you have to kind of funnel the questions a little bit and go, that's not important in this kind of application. It's not something that we have to be worried about. So you're reassuring them that you're hearing again what they're talking about, but you're telling them in this type of case, that's not going to be an issue. So you have to funnel the questions to make sure you don't go into the weeds in those kind of financial questions that might be really worrisome to them, and reassure them, but funnel the questions so that you're getting to the meat of the matter and determining what you can do, what the options might be or might not be. So that's one thing that you have to be aware of. Yes.
So sometimes your clients, they just go on and
Yes,
on
they
and on,
do.
out of the box
Yes,
talking,
they
and you
do.
want to guide them back in, but you don't want to be rude because they're telling you about their children or grandchildren, and you have a limited time also. How do you guide them back in?
So one of the things that you can think of doing to guide them is from the beginning, set up a roadmap. This is our 1 hour initial interview. We're going to talk about the matters that you raised in your pre-application questionnaire. We're going to see if there are any options for you, and we're going to try and stay on track. So you can tell them from the beginning, we're going to try and stay on track. So at that point, you might be able to say, I love hearing about your kids, but right now we do have a limited amount of time. So I want to make sure that we get to cover all the things that are really important so that we'll be able to determine if there are options for you. So you just remind them back to what you said at the beginning about the roadmap for the interview and say, I love hearing about that, but maybe today might not be the best time. And, hopefully that they're not pulling out their pictures of the children to show you as well, unless it's relevant. So you need to make sure that you're fully understanding the client's objective and their situation. Why have they come to see you? What do they hope that you can help them with? And don't equate your experience to theirs. So if they come in and they start telling you of some terrible family situation that's really creating havoc in their lives, and they really want to see if you can help them overcome it, don't say, well, that reminds me of something that happened to me too. Well, no, that's not the purpose, and that's not the objective to exchange your personal history with them. Again, keep it professional. You're there as a professional to help them. When you go in to see other professionals, you don't expect them to be sharing their whole life story with you. You expect to be there to get a service that you're paying for. So again, you don't want to try and tell them that their situation, which they think is really horrible, is just like something that happened to you too. It might be, but that's not the purpose of this interview. So just try to, hold your personal details back. Maybe when you get to be really good friends later, it might be something that you talk about, but also maybe not. Every client situation is absolutely unique. So even if it might be similar to something that happened in your life, their situation is still unique, and to them, that's the most important thing. They're there because they're hoping that you can help them with a solution to their immigration issues. Try not to repeat yourself. I'll say that again. Try not to repeat yourself. It can sound condescending if you say the same thing over and over and over again. So try not to have repetition in what you're saying to them. If you must reiterate, tell them, I'm sorry that I'm saying this again, but I just want to make sure that we both understand. Or, say it in a different way. Try and rephrase it. Maybe there's a language barrier, maybe there's some other barrier, or maybe you just haven't explained it well. So try and say it again in a different way if you're certain that they haven't really grasped what you were trying to explain to them. So if there is any kind of language barrier, just be very clear, again, using simple language, going back to the point about don't pontificate, make sure you're using language that's easy to understand. Stay out of the weeds. And the weeds are that, you know, kind of personal life issues or the issues that are aside of the actual objective, why they came in to see you. So you don't need to know their entire life story. So if they're coming in about a spousal sponsorship, you don't need to know about all their education, for example, or all their work experience, or, you know, quite a few other details. There are lots of things that you don't need to know. So again, it's your responsibility to keep the interview on track while making sure that you get all the information that you need, but it's still your responsibility to keep everything on track. There might be several options that work for the client. So this is a place where you really can get into the weeds, because as we know, if there are several options, it's easy to start going into the explanation for each and every one and going, well, this one might be better, but then there's this case here, and then there might be this other thing over here. So try to focus on the best options for the client. And then if you follow up with an opinion letter or some kind of letter afterwards, you can say, well, we went over this option and these were the pros and cons. We went over this option, these were the pros and cons, and lay it all out in your opinion letter later. But it can become very confusing to go over all the options in front of the client and maybe looking things up in, let's say you have the BCPNP instruction guide, and to be flipping back and forth between the different sections, because we know that there are lots of different immigration programs, but for the client, they just want to know what's going to work for me, what's going to work best for me. So you might discuss a few options, but don't overwhelm them with too many different options unless you've got lots of time and you're really able to explain it really well to them. Think about doing that later in writing, because lots of people are visual learners rather than oral learners. Especially if it's material that's not familiar to them, they might really have a problem following all the different nuances of the different types of options. Listen. Make sure that you're really listening to everything that they have to say to you, and that you're understanding what they've come in to see you about. So let's say they've come in about one thing, but it turns out something else is going to work for them. For example, I've had a client come in, a couple, and they came in and they thought they were coming in to do some kind of skilled worker application, but it ended up they were common law. They'd been living common law for about 2 or 3 years at that point, and I said, have you considered a spousal sponsorship? And they went, oh, well, we didn't know that we could do that. So if I hadn't really been listening to, you know, what their final objective was for permanent residence for the non-Canadian, and, you know, thinking outside the box, I thought, well, you're thinking one way, but there's this other pathway that's also open to you. So if I hadn't been listening carefully, I might not have picked up on that, or I might have thought, well, there's some reason that they aren't doing that. But in terms of questioning them and listening to them, I found out that that was an option for them. Make sure they have every opportunity to express themselves. So don't try and cut them off or cut them short unless you really are running out of time. And if that's the case, then tell them, I think we're getting a little short on our time, but could we schedule some more time, either, you know, whenever it's convenient for you, or do you have more time now, or could we do a Skype call or something like that, so that they have every opportunity to express everything that's on their minds. Also give them a chance to ask additional questions or to tell you something. So, you know, if they haven't told you about all of their children or their husband's children or some other thing like that, make sure that they have an opportunity to tell you about those things or anything else that's relevant to what they might be doing. For example, they might have a job and the employer, they might tell you, oh, by the way, I talked to my employer and they're willing to support an application for permanent residence. You go, great, I needed to know that. That's really helpful. So they should have every opportunity to express themselves and to let you know those things. So active listening. Active listening is that you concentrate on exactly what the clients are saying to you. You acknowledge what they're saying with a nod or a comment like, oh, yes, that's great. That's really helpful to me to make, to find out the options for you. So some small comment or some way of indicating to them that you're listening, that you're hearing what they're saying. Use body language and facial expressions to indicate that you are listening. So, oh, that's great that you had another child. Or, oh, I'm sorry to hear that your mother's been ill. Or, oh, I'm really sorry that you had an application refused before. Let's see what we can do to help you. So, make sure that you're appropriately listening and letting them know that you're listening. This is always important because otherwise they think, oh, I just went in there, they were watching the TV while, taking the odd note, and I don't think they were really listening to me. They're not going to come back to you. Summarize. When you're getting to near the end of the interview, you can start to summarize. You can go over the options you've discussed and say, we talked about this one. This seems like a pretty good option for you. We talked about that one. That's kind of a medium option for you, or this one's just not going to work. Yeah. And prioritize your understanding of what the client wants to do. I had clients one time from Bangladesh, and the husband had 2 wives, which is allowed in Bangladesh under their laws. And he wanted to bring his second wife to Canada. And I said, unfortunately, under Canadian immigration rules, that marriage is not considered valid for immigration purposes. So you could sponsor your first wife and all of your children from both marriages, but you cannot sponsor your second wife while you still have a first wife. And I went over options for him. I said, if you were divorced from your first wife, then you could sponsor your second wife. Various options were discussed. And eventually he decided that he didn't want to divorce his first wife, nor his second wife. So he moved back to Bangladesh. But it was just a matter of really listening and letting him decide, showing him the options, talking about the options. And he was the one who decided, it was the mother of his elder children. He still loved her. There was, he had a relationship with her. And that was what worked for him. So just because they come in with one question for you doesn't mean that that's going to be, that the options that you present are going to be what they choose. Create a list of action items for each of you. So you could say to the client, well, I would like to see these various documents, your work permit, your study permit, something from your employer, and so on. And I'm going to send you a list of documents that would be required, and so on and so forth. So that each of you has your list of future tasks. And then you also talk about timelines for those tasks to be accomplished. So you're going to send those things to me within a week, and I'm going to reply to your questions within the next 2 days. So that each person is very clear on what their tasks are and how long it is until they're going to be accomplishing these tasks. It's a way to wind up the interview, and everybody is ready for the next steps. So the next steps might also include, might show them at the interview a retainer agreement, and you might go over it, or you might not. You might just say, here's my retainer agreement. Please go over it with your spouse, or go over it and let me know what you think. Or you can go over it with them and see if there's any revisions that need to be made, or maybe not. Maybe you don't do that. But it's an opportunity to, again, be winding up the interview and proceeding to next steps. Are you going to retain me for this service or not? And at the end of the interview, make sure you thank them. It's really nice. They've taken the time to come and see you in your office, or they've taken the time to have a Skype interview with you. And it's really important to them to acknowledge that, they've spent their time too. They realize that you spent your time, and they're likely to thank you. But it's really important that you say thank you to them too. Acknowledge that they have also spent some time and perhaps some money if you're charging for that interview. Be brief.
Very brief.
One of the things about the, especially the prospective client interview, is don't give everything away. It's, not the time to give absolutely everything away. That's what you're going to be doing when they're paying for your services.
On the other hand, though, Rhonda, how
Yep.
do you, so if you book a client and you charge them an hour, and you find that their situation is way, way more complicated than you thought, and the hour is over and you're not nearly there, what do you do?
You can schedule more time and you can determine with them if it's going to be something that you charge for or not. Tell them, I didn't realize from the information that you'd given me at the beginning or before you came for the interview some of the issues that were involved, and I'm going to need a bit more time to talk with you or to see more documentation. Usually I found that an hour is usually sufficient to get an idea if we're going to be able to proceed or not, if I have enough information to proceed or not.
Depends on the client if you're talking nonstop about other things.
It does, so that's why you have to try and make sure that you're keeping them on track. Any other questions from the room or on the web?
No, not for the one.
So I've got a bonus section too. And this is preparing your clients for interview with immigration authorities. Again, I've done thousands of interviews as a visa officer, and these would have been really helpful if a lot of people had come in with this preparation. So if your clients can vote for an interview, then try to go over their documents with them. Try to get the documents organized so that they will easily be able to find them and hand them over in an interview, so that they're not, going through their, big, huge binder and going, oh, I don't know where that is. I'm not sure about that. Let me see. And then, it takes 10 minutes just for them to try and find the right document. So try and make sure that they know easily where to find documents that they will be asked to produce at the interview. Clearly identify any issues that you think will arise. There's a reason that they've been called in for an interview. Visa officers and the inland immigration offices do not call people in for no reason anymore. They're very rarely doing quality assurance interviews. They're mainly doing interviews because there's some reason. So try and identify, if you can, any issues you think that will arise. So if you need to, do an ATIP to find out why they've been called in for the interview, because it should clearly be in the officer's notes, the review notes, as to why this person had been called in for an interview. So if you have time, do an ATIP to find that out and then advise the client accordingly. Question? Yeah.
Will there be time? Because sometimes if they.
Sometimes there's not time, but usually they're not convoking the interviews. They're usually convoking them with 4 weeks notice, which hopefully is enough time to get an ATIP, although these days some of the ATIPs are taking a lot longer. But then you can ask for a postponement of the interview. If you really think that it's going to be a serious issue, try to think. And also sometimes the clients know. Sometimes there's something that is in the back of their minds. They know why they're being called in for an interview, and it might be something they haven't revealed to you. Sometimes it can be things like a poison pen letter. Somebody's written in and said, oh, I think that that person really didn't do that work for 5 years. Or I think that person is not really married to that person. So it can be that kind of information that's been sent in, and the visa offices do tend to investigate to satisfy themselves that the information on file is true and correct. Advise clients to try and arrive definitely on time, but also relaxed and alert. So they shouldn't be, just totally out of it. They should be relaxed, but they should be alert, ready to answer questions, be on top of their game, have their documents ready so that they can do everything, but they should be alert. So they should listen very carefully. This also is very important at CBSA. They should listen very carefully to the question that's being asked and answer that question. So if they've been asked, how long have you been in Canada? They should say 5 years. And then stop. They should not 5 years, because I first came here as a visitor, and then I switched to a study permit, and then later on I got a work permit. But you know, I've had so much trouble with they're just giving the officer so many openings. So listen to the question, answer that question. Don't give the officer a lot of openings to ask other questions. The officers are trained to leave long, empty pauses. As human beings, we don't like those vacuums in conversation. We like the conversation to flow, and we will fill empty spaces. So if there's a long pause, the client's inclination is to fill it. So they should be very comfortable. They should sit back comfortably after they've answered the question that was asked. Sit back and relax and wait for the next question. Not open their mouths. I had a training officer one time, and he said, just give them enough rope to hang themselves. So the immigration interview is basically going to go similar to the interview that I described to you earlier for your clients. They'll generally start off with baseline questions. They'll say, may I see your passport? And the client hands over their passport. They may look at documents. They may ask questions like, what's your date of birth? What's your husband's name? Where do you work? So those kind of closed questions, just to establish baseline, and again, to lull the client into a false sense of security so that they don't think that there's anything bad coming. The officers are very well trained in this. Then they'll start with the open-ended questions. So tell me about what you do at work. And that's an open-ended question. They could answer with anything. And what the officer is doing is they have their NOC description out, and they're going, oh, so you only do one of the things that's in the NOC description. You don't do the majority of the things that are in the NOC description. They're not going to be that blatant about it, but you get where I'm going with this. That they're leaving the client lots of room to hang themselves. So again, they should be listening carefully, and they should have been prepared well by you so that they can answer the questions, and that they're not inadvertently giving away openings or information to the officer. Then the officer may narrow in on the questions, like I mentioned before, funneling the questions. They may narrow in on the question to get to the meat of the matter. And if you've done the ATIP, you'll know what the meat of the matter is. They don't believe that the client has actually done that work, or the employer didn't confirm. They phoned the employer and the employer did not confirm that they did that work or that they worked there for that long. So then they will get to those questions, and those difficult questions are the ones that hopefully you've done the ATIP and you've helped the client prepare for those questions. The officer may end with some kind of summary. They may not. It's up to the individual officer, and it's very different for each officer. But they may end up with a summary. Well, thank you for coming in today. I appreciate that you've answered my questions. We went over this and this, and then they may come to a decision, and I'm pleased to say we're going to be sending you out a visa in the next 2 weeks, or medical instructions, or something like that. Or they may not. They may say, thank you for coming. And you're at the door, the client's at the door, and they have no idea what the next steps are. They can ask, so you can advise the client, ask if there's a next step or if a decision has been made. What are the next steps? What's going to happen next with my application? And the officer may or may not decide to answer that question. They may say, we'll be in touch, which is just a very, yes, they'll be in touch. And you don't know whether that's going to be, we'll be in touch with good news or we'll be in touch with terrible news. So you have to prepare the client for that. They may not get any kind of closure, what we call closure, at the end of the interview. So thank you very much for coming today. Thank you. We appreciate it. If anybody has any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
If anyone has a question on the web, I didn't get any. I guess everything went smoothly. It's questions with a plural at imseminars with an s.com. So send a question to me.
We have a
In the
question in the
meantime,
room.
we have one in the room.
You have the microphone.
Wanda, you talked about cultural differences
Yeah.
and sensitivities on the client side. How about the other side of the equation? Let's say a client has an interview in Ghana. Are there any recommendations as to what to expect? And would it be a locally engaged officer, or what's your advice on that?
Okay, so they in visa offices overseas can have locally engaged people doing the interviews. So those could be local nationals. So let's say in Ghana, a Ghanaian, or it could be somebody of another nationality who's been hired locally to do the interviews. If they're designated as an immigration officer, they could be doing the interviews too. And yes, there can be problems. Unfortunately, the visa officers, whoever they are, if they're Canada-based officers or locally engaged staff, they hold the power. So they might not care too much. They might or might not be very sensitive, but the clients have to kind of, be prepared to go in, be relaxed, be alert, answer the questions. I wouldn't advise the clients to really try to change their behavior. Even if it's a locally engaged staff member who they feel is not particularly sensitive, or a Canadian officer who's not very sensitive, they still have to just, realize that that person is the person with the power. They have something that I want. So I'm going to be as good as I can in this interview.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have a draw for a free seminar. And we'll ask Debbie, who is our office personnel, she will do the draw for us, please. In the meantime, I'd just like to let you know about our upcoming seminars.
Absolutely.
February 28th, we're having one on Express Entry. We'll have the Queen of Express Entry, Roxanne McInnes. She will be doing a seminar. And she tells me that anyone who's done less than 10 e-applications, and I have not done one, so I should be there. Anyone who's done less than 10 should go to that one. She's challenged BCP&P in certain things that they've done, and she's won, so she is the go-to person for Express Entry. And also we have on March 12th, we're doing agricultural temporary foreign workers. We have someone who's worked with the Mexican embassy and helped a lot with agricultural seasonal workers. And we have John Laroni. He does a lot of temporary foreign workers, and we have students coming up for work permits. Can they work? We have procedural fairness, how to craft procedural fairness letters, and we have mothers without status. We have Catherine Sass, and someone who's actually worked with these mothers. People come to Canada and they get married or whatever, and then the husbands leave them and they haven't gotten their status. They withdraw the application. The kids can't get into school. So lots of interesting topics coming up. We will have workshops, so stay tuned. And if you know students, we offer 50% discount. Any students who want to join any of our seminars, we give them 50% off. So please pass the word around. And I hope to see as many of you again on our next seminar. Thank you. So, Michael Lefers is the person for a free seminar. Congratulations, Michael. You're not here, but we'll send you the information.
Thanks for coming, everybody, and thanks for everybody who's on the web, and we'll hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.